My wife framed me, stole my kids, and took everything. When I got rich and took the ultimate revenge, and then I never thought my life would turn into something out of a courtroom drama, but here I am. Looking back, I can see all the little moments where things started to crack, but when you're in it, you just keep pushing forward, assuming everything will work out. It didn't. And it all started with what I thought was a perfect life. I was 36 when it all fell apart. I had worked my way up from a broke college student to a lead developer at a promising startup. I wasn't some Silicon Valley genius, just a guy who could code for hours on end, fueled by caffeine and a dream of making it big. The company wasn't anything special at first. 5 guys crammed into a tiny office, hustling to build something we hoped would change the industry. The pay wasn't great, but they offered stock options, and I figured it was worth the gamble. The founders had a solid plan, and unlike some of the disaster startups I had interviewed with, they actually knew what they were doing. It was a grind, but I loved it. That was around the time I met Megan. The way we met was straight out of some rom-com, except instead of a charming, smooth introduction, I completely embarrassed myself. I was running on 2 hours of sleep after an all-night deployment when I stumbled into a coffee shop near the office, barely able to keep my eyes open. Somehow, I managed to trip over absolutely nothing and spill my entire coffee all over this woman's laptop. I felt like the biggest idiot on the planet. But instead of losing her mind, she just laughed. I stammered out apologies and, without thinking, blurted out that I'd buy her a new one. Maxed out my credit card. But somehow, that disaster of a morning turned into a dinner invitation, which turned into late-night conversations, and before I knew it, we were inseparable. Megan was different from anyone I had ever dated. She was confident, funny, and had this way of making every room she walked into feel warmer. She worked as a dental hygienist and had some of the craziest patient stories I'd ever heard. We just clicked. She actually seemed interested when I rambled about coding, and I loved listening to her vent about her annoying coworkers. Everything felt easy with her. Within 2 years, we were married. Nothing extravagant, just a small wedding in her parents' backyard. It felt like the start of something incredible. We bought a modest house in the suburbs. It wasn't a dream home by any means, but it was ours. The commute sucked, an hour each way on a good day, but the schools were great, and we wanted to plan ahead. Not long after, Emily was born, and 2 years later, we had Lucas. Those first few years were exhausting. I was juggling a startup job with sleepless nights, diapers, and the general chaos of having 2 young kids. There were days I didn't even know what day it was, let alone if I had eaten or showered. But Megan was incredible. She cut back on her hours at work to be home more, and somehow, we made it work. The company started growing. What had once been 5 guys crammed into a tiny office turned into a real company with real employees. I moved up the ladder, first to lead developer, then engineering manager. The pay was getting better, and my stock options kept vesting. I had about 250,000 shares at around 70 cents each. Not exactly life-changing, but I held on to them, just in case. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. Family vacations every other year, weekend BBQs with the neighbors, birthday parties, and lazy Sunday mornings watching cartoons with the kids. It was the kind of life I had always wanted. Then, Connor and Rachel moved in next door, and everything started to change. Connor was one of those guys who lived for the gym. Every conversation somehow circled back to his workout routine, his diet, or some new supplement he was trying. His garage was basically a full CrossFit gym, and he was always posting fitness videos online. Rachel, on the other hand, was a corporate lawyer who worked insane hours, so Connor was home most of the time, working on his brand, as he liked to call it. At first, he seemed like a good guy, always offering to help with house projects, inviting me over for beers. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags. Megan started working out in Connor's gym. She had always been somewhat active, but suddenly, she was obsessed. It started small, 3 workouts a week, nothing out of the ordinary. Then, it was every day. Then, it was twice a day. She started buying expensive gym clothes, protein powders, all these supplements. Our grocery bill doubled because suddenly, everything had to be organic, grass-fed, and clean. She started wearing makeup to go work out, something she had never done before. I didn't think much of it at first. If anything, I thought it was good for her. She seemed happier, had more energy. God, I was an idiot. Little things started piling up. I'd come home from work, exhausted, and Connor would be there, helping Megan move furniture or fixing something in the backyard. Always shirtless, of course, because apparently shirts were optional when you had abs. Then came the comments. Connor says you should make more time for family. Connor thinks work-life balance is important. Connor manages to run his business and still stay in shape. I bit my tongue at first, but after a while, it was like every conversation circled back to him. Like she was comparing me to him. It wasn't just the workouts. She started acting differently. Always glued to her phone. Always tilting the screen away when I walked by. Changed her password. Something we had always shared just in case of emergencies with the kids. She became distant, short-tempered. If I asked about her day, she'd sigh like it was a chore to talk to me. If I asked what she wanted for dinner, she'd snap that I never helped with meal planning. Then came the credit card charges. Expensive restaurants I had never been to, hotel stays in our own city, lingerie I had definitely never seen. The final blow came from my son. One day, I was playing with Lucas in the backyard when he pointed to Connor's garage. Through the window, I saw Connor standing behind Megan, spotting her while she lifted weights. Their bodies too close, the way they moved too familiar. Lucas smiled up at me and said, "Mommy and Connor are best friends." I felt something inside me crack. I tried talking to Megan about it, telling her how uncomfortable it made me, but she exploded. Accused me of being controlling, jealous, insecure. Said I was never home anyway, so what did it matter? And just like that, it was war. The fights got worse. The coldness turned to contempt. She started throwing out lines like, "I deserve better, and you're holding me back." And I should have seen it coming. I should have known she was planning something. But I was too busy trying to keep my head above water, too busy believing we could fix things. Until one regular Tuesday morning, I got called into HR at work. 2 cops were waiting for me. Megan had made her move, and my life as I knew it was about to be destroyed. Getting arrested at work was the single most humiliating moment of my life. One minute, I was knee-deep in code reviews, focused on meeting deadlines, and the next, I was in handcuffs, being led past my coworkers like some kind of criminal. I barely processed what was happening. My brain couldn't catch up. The officers were calm but firm, reading me my rights as I stood frozen in the HR office. My boss stood off to the side, avoiding eye contact. People I had worked with for years peeked out from behind their desks, whispering. Megan had gone to the police that morning and claimed I had assaulted her. She had bruises as proof. She told them we had fought about money, that I had lost control, and that she feared for her safety. They didn't ask for my side of the story. They just came to my office and took me away. The next 48 hours were a blur of fluorescent lights, cold metal benches, and the constant stench of sweat and bleach. I had never even gotten a parking ticket before, and suddenly, I was being processed like a violent offender. I wasn't allowed to call anyone until hours after my arrest. When I finally got my one call, I rang my brother, Zach, who immediately started working on getting me out. He bailed me out 2 days later, but by then, the damage was done. I was fired. They didn't say it outright, just put me on administrative leave. But we all knew what that meant. No company wants to be associated with an executive accused of domestic violence. It didn't matter that I was innocent. The accusation was enough. I couldn't go home either. Megan had filed an emergency restraining order, meaning I was legally barred from stepping foot in my own house. She had the kids. My own children, the ones I had tucked in every night, read bedtime stories to, made pancakes for on Sunday mornings. I couldn't see them. CPS got involved, and a court granted Megan emergency full custody. My only contact with Emily and Lucas was limited to supervised visits in a sterile government office for 2 hours every other weekend. I had never felt so helpless in my life. The worst part was how easily people turned on me. Friends who had been to my house, who had seen me be a devoted father, who had watched me sacrifice everything for my family. Most of them ghosted me. Megan had gotten to them first. She had spent weeks building her case, planting seeds of doubt, twisting every argument into proof that I was abusive. She even got some of the neighborhood moms involved, telling them how trapped she had felt for years. They wrote statements about how they had always suspected something was wrong, how they had heard things. One woman claimed she saw me grab Megan's arm in a parking lot. What really happened? I was helping her carry grocery bags after she had sprained her wrist. Megan and Connor had planned everything. Every bruise she had from bumping into furniture or a bad workout session. Suddenly, those were injuries from me. Every normal disagreement? Now part of a pattern of escalating violence. They had twisted reality into something so believable that even people who had known me for years bought into it. I moved into a depressing studio apartment near Zach's place because it was all I could afford after paying for a lawyer and child support. It smelled like cat piss, the walls were thin, and I could hear my neighbor arguing with his girlfriend every night. I went from coming home to my kids running into my arms to sitting alone in a space barely bigger than my old bedroom. Emily wouldn't even look at me during visits. Megan had told her I was sick and needed to get help before I could come home. Lucas was too young to understand. He would just cry and ask why I didn't love them anymore. I tried explaining, but how do you tell a 5-year-old that his mother is lying to him? That everything he's been told about his father is a twisted version of reality? I spent my days applying for jobs, but the moment anyone Googled me, the news articles came up. Tech executive arrested for domestic violence. That was all anyone needed to see. No one wanted to hire me. I ended up taking a junior developer job at a company that was desperate enough to overlook the allegations. I went from leading entire engineering teams to being just another faceless employee writing mindless code. It paid like crap, but it was all I could get. At night, I drove for Uber to make ends meet. The irony wasn't lost on me. Some of my passengers were interns at my old company. I kept my hat low, avoided conversation. I didn't want to see the recognition in their faces. The worst part? Megan and Connor weren't even hiding anymore. He had moved into my house, playing dad to my kids, using my child support payments to fund their new life together. They posted pictures on social media, Connor grilling in my backyard, Megan leaning against him, Emily and Lucas smiling next to them. It made me sick. I was at rock bottom. Then, everything changed. One night, I was finishing an Uber shift when I got a text from an old coworker. I almost ignored it, but something about it made me stop. "You see the news?" I pulled over and opened the link he sent me. My old company, the one that had fired me, was getting acquired. Not just acquired, bought out in a massive deal worth billions. I did the math in my head. Fast. I still had stock. 250,000 shares. At the new buyout price, that put me at $35 million. For a long time, I just stared at the number. It didn't feel real. First, I threw up. Then, I called my lawyer. Then, I threw up again. Within 24 hours, Megan found out. She sent me an email, the first one since the accusations. All sweet and concerned, like we were best friends. "Hey, hope you're doing well. Been thinking a lot about our situation. Maybe we should talk about what's best for the kids." Translation: I heard you're rich now. Let's pretend I didn't ruin your life. I didn't respond. Took a screenshot and sent it to my lawyer. Then, the next day, Connor showed up at my regular coffee shop. The same guy who had stolen my wife, my home, my kids, acting like we were old pals. "Hey man, water under the bridge, right? We all make mistakes. Megan's really sorry about everything." I stared at him, waiting to see if he would laugh. He didn't. He was actually serious. It took everything in me not to throw my coffee in his face. Instead, I smiled. "Yeah, sure. No hard feelings." Because the game wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I kept my mouth shut and played along, pretending to be the same beaten-down loser they thought I was. Megan and Connor thought they had me cornered, but they had no idea what was coming. I stayed quiet, kept driving Uber, kept my head down while my lawyer worked behind the scenes. The acquisition still had a few months before it finalized, and I needed everything to go through without Megan trying to interfere. If she caught wind of just how much money was coming my way, she'd go after it like a shark smelling blood. And sure enough, she did. A few weeks after the news broke, I got served with papers. Megan was suing me for half the acquisition money, claiming we were still legally married when the stock value increased. She also wanted increased child support based on my new net worth and primary custody of the kids, because apparently, a violent abuser shouldn't have millions to spend on his children. The irony was almost laughable. The audacity of this woman. She accused me of beating her, had me arrested, took my kids, took my house, destroyed my reputation, and now that I had money, she wanted a piece of it? If she hadn't set me up, hadn't gotten me fired, hadn't forced me to cash out some shares early to afford my legal fees, she might have actually had a case for half. But there was one thing she didn't account for, her own mistakes. Megan showed up at my new house on a Sunday morning, unannounced. I hadn't seen her in person since the last court hearing, and she looked different. Gone was the confident, smug woman who had stood in court spinning lies about me. She had traded her expensive gym clothes for a plain sweater and jeans, no makeup, hair in a messy bun, like she was trying to look as pitiful as possible. It was all an act. She stood on my doorstep, shifting from foot to foot, pretending to be nervous. "Can we talk?" she asked, voice soft, like she wasn't the same person who had tried to ruin my life. "It's about the kids." That was always her way in, using Emily and Lucas as leverage. I almost slammed the door in her face, but I had a better idea. I let her in. My house had security cameras everywhere. My phone was recording in my pocket. This wasn't about trust. It was about evidence. She sat on my couch and immediately started crying. "I made a mistake," she said between fake sobs. "Connor, he manipulated me. He made me think you were cheating. He convinced me to file those charges." I was scared and confused. I almost laughed in her face. She was really trying to rewrite history, like I didn't have proof of her staging bruises, plotting with Connor, laughing about how easy it would be to take my money. She wiped at her tears and looked up at me. "We could be a family again, Jared. The kids miss you. We can fix this." Oh, now she wanted to fix things? Now that her scam had run dry, and she was stuck working extra shifts at the dental office? Now that Connor had moved on to a new woman, and she had no more free ride? She even tried bringing up our first date, reminding me of how we met, like a trip down memory lane would make me forget everything she had done. And then she made her real move. "I've talked to my lawyer. If we can't work this out, I have rights. The stock value increased while we were married. I deserve half, for the kids." There it was. The veiled threat, hidden behind crocodile tears. It was never about fixing our family. It was about money. It was always about money. I let her finish her performance. I even offered her some tissues, the cheap, scratchy kind, not the fancy ones. Then, I stood up and walked to the door. "I'll have my lawyer contact yours." She hesitated, realizing her little act hadn't worked. "Jared." I opened the door. "Have a good day, Megan." The second she was out of my house, I called my lawyer. Turns out, Megan had already been busy. She had filed for emergency spousal support based on my acquisition money and was trying to modify the custody agreement, claiming I was a flight risk now that I had millions. She even reached out to some of my old co-workers, fishing for anything she could use against me. But she had made one huge mistake. She thought I was the same guy she had taken down before. She thought I didn't have anything left to fight with. What she didn't realize was that I had been gathering evidence for months. Court was set for the following month. Megan walked in looking like she had raided the clearance section of a thrift store. She had mastered the struggling single mom look, hair in a loose braid, minimal makeup, a plain dress that was probably picked out specifically to make her look humble. She even brought Emily and Lucas, against court orders, sitting them in the front row like props for her performance. Her lawyer went first. The guy probably cost more than my first car, and he knew how to put on a show. He painted Megan as the devoted wife who had sacrificed her own ambitions to support my career, the mother who had selflessly cared for our children while I chased success. He made it seem like she was entitled to half my wealth because of her emotional investment in my success. Then, just for dramatic effect, he brought up the domestic violence accusations again, spinning me as a volatile man who had gotten lucky with stocks but was still a danger to his family. The whole time, Megan kept sneaking glances at me, probably wondering why I wasn't panicking. Then, it was my lawyer's turn. Greg stood up, adjusted his tie, and in the calmest voice said, "Your Honor, before we present our defense, we'd like to submit new evidence." The judge nodded. Greg pressed play. The courtroom screens lit up with security footage. First, Footage of Megan coming by my house multiple times while I was at work, trying to get in. Then, footage of her and Connor sitting in his car outside, rehearsing her emotional speech. Footage of her planting fake evidence in my mailbox. Letters she had written to herself, dated before she filed the charges, claiming she was afraid of me. And then, the final blow. Video of her and Connor using makeup to create fake bruises, laughing as they took pictures. The judge's face hardened. Megan looked like she was about to pass out. Connor, who had been subpoenaed to appear, kept shifting in his seat, looking for an exit. Then Greg dropped the nuclear bomb. Your Honor, we've also uncovered additional victims. Turns out, Megan and Connor had pulled this scam before. 2 other men in different cities, both successful in tech, both falsely accused of abuse, both taken to the cleaners in divorce settlements. And the real MVP? Rachel, Connor's ex-wife. She was a lawyer herself and had been quietly building a case against them for months. She came to court armed with texts, emails, bank records, everything. By the time Greg was done, Megan's lawyer was sweating bullets. He tried backpedaling. Your Honor, my client may have been confused about certain events. The judge cut him off, called a recess. An hour later, he came back looking furious. He dismissed Megan's claim for the money, ordered her to pay my legal fees, and referred the case to the DA for potential fraud charges. Then, he turned to the custody matter. After reviewing the evidence, he granted me full custody while Megan was investigated for perjury and fraud. Connor? He tried to run the second court-ended. Made it all the way to the parking lot before Rachel's new boyfriend, who happened to be a cop, caught him. Megan and Connor had spent months planning my downfall. I took them down in a single day. Megan and Connor were finished, but I wasn't celebrating yet. The judge's ruling was a huge win. Full custody, no money for Megan, and fraud charges on the horizon. But I knew better than to think it was over. Megan wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. I had spent enough time around her to know she was already scheming, looking for some last-ditch way to escape the consequences. I had my kids back, but they weren't the same. Emily barely spoke at first, her usual bubbly personality replaced with quiet hesitance. Lucas clung to me constantly, like he was afraid I'd disappear if he let go. They had been fed so many lies about me, told for months that I didn't want them, that I was dangerous. Undoing that damage was going to take time. The first few weeks were chaos. I burned dinner multiple times, forgot about Lucas's school project, sent Emily to class wearing 2 different socks. But little by little, we figured it out. I hired a child psychologist, Dr. Sarah, who specialized in cases like ours. She helped Emily open up, helped Lucas stop waking up in the middle of the night crying. Meanwhile, Megan was unraveling. Connor had turned on her the second he was arrested, spilling everything to the feds in exchange for a lighter sentence. He played the victim, claiming Megan was the mastermind, but it didn't matter. He was still looking at serious prison time. Megan, on the other hand, was trying to weasel her way out. She fired her lawyer, then hired another. Tried to claim she was manipulated. Tried to claim she was the real victim. The DA wasn't buying it. And then came the final act of desperation. One night, about a month after the court ruling, I got an email from Megan. The subject line was simple. Please. The message was a mess of excuses, apologies, and manipulations. She wrote about how she had made terrible mistakes, how she had been blinded by fear. She said she missed the kids, that they needed their mother. And then, of course, she asked for money. She claimed she had nothing left, that she couldn't even afford groceries. I didn't respond. A week later, she tried calling, then texting, then showing up at my house again. This time, I didn't let her in. The last time I saw her was in court for her sentencing. She got 15 years. Connor got 10. Rachel, Connor's ex-wife, sat beside me that day. She had played a huge role in taking them down, and we had stayed in touch throughout the process. She had been through hell with Connor, just like I had with Megan. When the judge read the sentence, she let out a breath like she had been holding it for years. As for me, I was done looking back. I had spent too much time fighting battles I never should have had to fight. It was time to move forward. I moved the kids into a new home, a quiet neighborhood where no one knew our past. I kept working from home, growing my consulting business, making sure I was always there when Emily and Lucas needed me. I set up trust funds for them, made sure they'd never have to worry about money. And I started something new, a foundation for fathers fighting false accusations. In the months since my case went public, I had heard from dozens of men in similar situations, good fathers who had been destroyed by lies. I used my money, my resources, and my experience to help them. So far, we had already helped 3 dads get their kids back. That felt better than any victory in court. Dating? Not even on my radar. I wasn't going to bring anyone new into my kids' lives until I was sure they were ready. They had been through enough. Some nights were still hard. Emily would get anxious if I was out of sight for too long. Lucas would wake up from nightmares. But they were smiling again, laughing again. Slowly but surely, we were healing. Megan had tried to destroy me, but in the end, she had only destroyed herself. And I had everything that truly mattered. It's been almost a year since everything ended. Megan is in prison. Connor is too. The trial made headlines for a while. Suburban fraud ring exposed and false domestic violence scheme unraveled. People were shocked, but to me, it was just confirmation of what I had known all along. They had built a life on lies, and eventually, it collapsed on them. Emily and Lucas are finally settling into a life that feels normal again. It wasn't easy at first. The damage Megan did to them ran deep. Emily had spent so long being told that I was dangerous, that I didn't love them, that she had to take care of her brother because I wouldn't. Lucas had been made to believe I had abandoned him, that I had chosen money over them. Undoing those lies took time. Emily is back to being the curious, energetic kid I remember. She just joined the science club at school. Turns out she inherited my love for building things. Lucas is still all over the place, bouncing between wanting to be a soccer player, a firefighter, and a computer game maker who helps people. His words, not mine. He's finally laughing again, which is more than I could have asked for a year ago. I don't think about Megan much anymore. I don't check for updates on her case. I don't read the emails she still tries to send from prison. The last one I opened was another desperate plea, full of empty apologies and requests for money. I deleted it. The house we live in now isn't flashy, but it's safe, secure. It's in a neighborhood where no one knows me as the guy who was on the news, the guy who was falsely accused, the guy who got millions overnight. Here, I'm just another dad who picks his kids up from school and burns pancakes on Sunday mornings. The consulting business is doing well, but I don't let it take over my life. I have a great team running things, and I only step in when I want to. The real work I care about is the foundation I started. In the last 6 months, we've helped multiple fathers fight false allegations, reconnect with their kids, and rebuild their lives. The system isn't designed to protect men in situations like mine. I was lucky. I had money, a good lawyer, and undeniable proof. Most guys don't. I can't change the system overnight, but I can make sure that fewer fathers get railroaded the way I did. As for dating, that's still a no. It's not about trust issues. It's about priorities. My kids come first. They need stability, not more change. Maybe one day I'll be ready, but right now, the only people I care about sharing my life with are the 2 little ones who never should have been taken from me in the first place. The neighbor who wrote that false statement against me showed up at my door recently. She looked nervous, holding a batch of cookies like it was some kind of peace offering. She said Megan had convinced her I was dangerous, showed her fake bruises, fake evidence. She said she was sorry. I didn't say much back, just nodded. I don't have room for grudges, but I also don't have room for people who turn their backs when it matters most. Most days, I don't even think about the past anymore. There are still scars, but they don't control me. I wake up, make breakfast, take my kids to school, work, come home, and just live. That's something Megan and Connor will never get to do again. They thought they had one. They thought they had destroyed me. But in the end, I got everything that mattered.